The financial preparation for retirement receives decades of attention. The investment strategies, the savings rates, the tax optimization, the income planning, all of it is discussed, modeled, and revisited with a regularity that reflects how seriously the financial dimension of retirement is taken by the people who plan for it carefully. The psychological preparation for retirement receives almost none. Not because it is less important. By the accounts of the people who have lived through the transition, it is frequently more disorienting than the financial challenges, and in some cases more consequential to the quality of the retirement years. But because the psychological dimension is harder to quantify, harder to plan for in any structured way, and culturally treated as something that will work itself out naturally once the financial piece is in place. The implicit assumption is that if the money is there, the rest follows. For many people, the rest does not follow automatically. And the gap between expecting the rest to follow and discovering that it does not is one of the least discussed and most significant transitions of adult life. My name is William Grant. What I want to do today is describe the psychological terrain of retirement with enough precision that the people who have not yet crossed that threshold can prepare for it more honestly, and the people who are currently living through its challenges can recognize what they are experiencing as a known, documented, navigable process, rather than as a personal failure or an indication that something has gone uniquely wrong for them. The first and most consistently underestimated psychological challenge of retirement is the identity disruption. For most professionals who retire after a long career, the professional identity has been not just a description of what they do, but a central organizing principle of who they are. The work produced the daily structure. The professional role provided social context, colleagues, meetings, the rhythm of organizational life that created belonging without requiring it to be explicitly sought. The career generated a continuous and externally validated sense of purpose. This is what I contribute. This is why my presence matters. This is the measure by which I evaluate my days. When the career ends, all of this ends simultaneously. Not the desire for structure, belonging, purpose, and contribution. Those desires remain entirely intact. What ends is the mechanism that had been providing them automatically for 30 or 40 years, without the person ever needing to seek them deliberately because the work produced them as a byproduct. I worked with someone who illustrated this with a clarity I have not forgotten. His name was Frederick, 64 years old, a retired oncologist with 37 years of clinical practice. He was a man of exceptional professional competence and genuine personal warmth, who had planned his retirement carefully and who genuinely wanted to stop working at the pace his career had required. What he had not anticipated was the specific form of the disorientation that followed. He described it not as sadness or regret, but as weightlessness, a sense that he had removed a scaffold he had not realized he was leaning on, and found that his sense of upright was more dependent on the scaffold than on his own structure. The days, without the appointments and the hospital rounds and the continuous stream of problems requiring his expertise, felt both free and formless. He had imagined freedom and received formlessness instead, and the difference between those two experiences was not one he had been prepared for. What Frederick was experiencing is what researchers in the psychology of retirement call role discontinuity, the abrupt end of a role that provided identity, structure, and social context simultaneously. The financial planning for retirement is an exercise in preparing for a future state. The psychological preparation would involve developing, before retirement arrives, alternative sources of the same goods that work had been providing, alternative structures, alternative social contexts, alternative sources of purpose and contribution that do not depend on the professional role continuing. Not as replacements for the career, as independent foundations that exist alongside the career during the final working years and that are sufficiently established to support the transition when it occurs. The people who navigate this transition most successfully are not uniformly those with the most financial security or the most carefully constructed retirement plans. They are frequently those who had built before retirement at least one source of deep engagement outside of work that had its own structure and its own community. The second psychological challenge, the one that surprises people because it seems like it should be the opposite of a problem, is the confrontation with unstructured time at a scale that has no precedent in adult life. Most people who retire have not, since their early 20s, been primarily responsible for the structure of their own days. The educational system, then the professional system, provided the structure for 40 or 45 years. Vacation and weekends were intervals within a structured life. Retirement removes the structure and replaces it with complete discretion over every hour of every day. A form of freedom that is genuinely desirable in theory and genuinely disorienting in practice until a new structure is built. Frederick described the first 6 months of retirement as the most anxious period of his adult life, and not for any reason connected to money. The anxiety was the anxiety of unlimited choice without a framework for choosing. The anxiety of a life that was entirely his to direct and that he had not yet developed the habits and commitments that direction required. The third psychological challenge is the loss of the social ecosystem that work provides. This is the least discussed of the three because it is the least visible from outside the workplace, the daily relational texture of a professional life. The colleagues who became friends by proximity, the meetings that were simultaneously professional and social, the lunch conversations, the hallway exchanges, the accumulated shared context of years of working alongside the same people. This relational texture disappears entirely at retirement, and what replaces it must be actively built in a way that workplace relationships never required. Deliberate social construction is a skill that many high-achieving professionals have not needed to exercise because their social world was built for them by their professional context. Developing it in retirement requires an investment of effort and initiative that can feel uncomfortable to someone who spent 40 years being sought out for their expertise and now must seek out others without the automatic credibility and relevance that the professional role provided. Frederick, in the 2 years following his retirement, built what he described as the most intentional social structure of his adult life. He joined a board of a medical nonprofit where his clinical background was genuinely needed. He established a weekly group of retired physicians that met for a combination of intellectual discussion and social engagement. He developed a mentoring relationship with 2 young oncologists that provided the sense of professional continuity and contribution that he had not expected to need, but clearly did. None of these were replacements for the career. All of them were structures that provided something the career had provided and that the career's absence had revealed as necessary. The process of building them was deliberate, sometimes uncomfortable, and ultimately more satisfying than the career itself had been in its final years, because every element of it was chosen rather than inherited. The practical implication, the thing that distinguishes people who prepare for the psychological terrain from those who encounter it without preparation, is the timeline. The structures that support a psychologically healthy retirement need to be established before the retirement occurs, not after. Starting the search for alternative sources of structure, belonging, and purpose 6 months after retirement when the disorientation is already present and the motivational energy is lower, produces different outcomes than starting at 2 years before, when the career is still providing the daily foundation and the work of building alternatives can proceed from a position of stability. The people who navigate retirement best typically enter it with at least one established non-work engagement of sufficient depth that it has its own community, its own rhythm, and its own claim on their time and attention. The reflection I want to leave you with is a question about your own situation, stated directly and worth holding with genuine honesty. Outside of your professional life, what is the single most structured, most socially embedded, most purposeful engagement you currently have? Not the most enjoyable or the most relaxing, the most structured, most embedded, and most purposeful. If the answer is not immediately clear, that is the information your retirement preparation is waiting for.